Welcome to Stories Junction. Let's begin today's story. My name is Andrew. After 45 years on this earth, I've come to understand something fundamental. No one wants to feel like a burden to the person they love. When you love someone, you want to be their anchor, their refuge, not a source of tension or unease. You want to be the one they turn to in a storm, not the one they sidestep to avoid. But when that dynamic shifts, when you start sensing that your presence is more of a weight than a comfort, it cuts deep like a slow, quiet wound. That's how it began with my wife, Claire. She started pulling away, her warmth replaced by a distance I couldn't quite grasp. When I finally mustered the courage to ask what was wrong, her eyes met mine, heavy with exhaustion, and she said, "I just need some time to myself for a while." So, I gave her what she asked for, stepping back to honor her request. But her reaction to my withdrawal, and the truth behind her growing coldness, demands that I tell this story from the beginning. I want you to understand exactly how things unraveled, piece by piece, and why I'm standing where I am now. Claire and I met in Asheville, a small mountain town in North Carolina, at a poetry reading group held in a cozy, dimly lit bookstore called The Quiet Page. It was the kind of place where the air smelled of old paper and coffee, and the wooden floors creaked underfoot. The group was small, maybe 10 people at most, gathered in a circle of mismatched chairs, sharing favorite poems or ones we'd written ourselves. Claire and I were both quiet souls, the kind who preferred listening to speaking, observing to performing. Some nights, we'd sit through an entire meeting without exchanging more than a glance or a polite nod. But I always noticed her. There was something about the way she held a book, her fingers tracing the edges of the pages, or the way her brow furrowed when a line of poetry hit her just right, like she was unraveling its meaning in her mind. She had a quiet intensity, a depth that didn't demand attention, but drew it anyway. Over time, those glances turned into conversations. They started small, comments about a poem's imagery, a shared appreciation for the way a certain poet captured longing or loss. We'd linger after the group ended, standing by the bookstore's front window, talking about books, ideas, or the way the Blue Ridge Mountains caught the light at sunset. We were both introverts, comfortable in our own heads, and that made our connection feel effortless. Our talks were never loud or hurried. They unfolded slowly, like the turning of pages in a well-loved book. Eventually, those conversations spilled beyond the bookstore. We'd meet for coffee at a little cafe down the street, or take walks along the French Broad River, letting the silence between us carry as much weight as our words. I won't lie, I wasn't sure what to expect when we started dating. Could two people so used to solitude, so accustomed to their own rhythms, really build something lasting? But that's what made it work in the beginning. There was no pressure to fill every moment with noise tertiary. Noise, no need to be anything other than ourselves. If Claire needed space to think, I gave it. If I needed time to process before speaking, she understood. That mutual respect, that quiet understanding, was what pulled me to her. We dated for 3 years, finding a rhythm that felt like ours. We learned each other's habits, the way Claire liked to curl up with a sketchbook when she was deep in thought, or how I'd get lost in spreadsheets for hours, organizing numbers like they were pieces of a puzzle. We didn't try to change each other, and that felt like a gift. There were no grand gestures or sweeping promises, just a steady, quiet partnership that grew stronger with time. After 3 years, we both knew we wanted to keep building that life together. So, we got married in a small ceremony in a friend's backyard, under a canopy of string lights and surrounded by the people who mattered most. The mountains loomed in the distance, and the air was cool with the promise of autumn. Looking back, I wonder if we understood then how much would change, not just in the world around us, but within us too. Marriage, I'd learned, has a way of revealing things you can't see when you're just dating. When Claire and I moved in together after the wedding, reality hit like a shift in the weather. We'd both always been private people, content in our own corners of the world. When we were dating, that worked beautifully. We'd meet for a few hours, share a meal or a walk, then retreat to our separate spaces to recharge. But living together in a small house in Asheville's quiet suburbs was different. Suddenly, Our differences weren't just quirks, they were part of every single day. I worked as an accountant, my life governed by rigid schedules, early mornings, and late nights spent wrestling with financial reports. The office was a constant hum of activity. Phones ringing, emails piling up, clients demanding answers. By the time I got home, I was drained, craving silence to reset my mind. Claire, on the other hand, was a freelance graphic designer. Her work was fluid, creative, unbound by the ticking clock of an office. She'd spend hours sketching at the kitchen table, surrounded by pencils and half-finished designs, or staring out the window, lost in thought. Some days, she'd still be in her pajamas at noon, sipping tea while tweaking a logo or brainstorming for a client. That contrast in our rhythms didn't break us, but it took work to navigate. I'd come home wired from deadlines, needing quiet to decompress, while Claire might still be in the middle of a creative flow, barely noticing I'd walked in. Our evenings were a dance of trying to align our mental states. Sometimes I try to talk about my day, but she'd be lost in her work, nodding absently. Other times, she'd want to share an idea, but I'd be too exhausted to engage fully. Still, we made it work. We talked things out, learned when to give space and when to lean in. We'd cook dinner together, or sit on the porch with a glass of wine, letting the silence between us feel like a bridge rather than a wall. In those early months of marriage, despite the occasional stumble, I thought we were finding our footing. I believed we were building something solid, something that could withstand whatever came next. But as the months turned into years, I'd come to see just how fragile that foundation really was, and how a single crack could threaten to bring it all down. 3 years into our marriage, I started noticing a shift in Claire that I couldn't quite pin down at first. She'd always been the kind of person who cherished her quiet time at home, sketching designs or reading in the soft glow of a lamp. But now, she was leaving the house more often, daytime errands, she'd say, or meetings with clients that seemed to stretch longer than necessary. When she came back, she was quieter than usual, her responses clipped, her eyes drifting somewhere I couldn't follow. Her phone buzzed more frequently, too, and she'd glance at it with a quickness that felt out of character. When I asked about her day, I'd get a vague, "It was fine," or a distracted nod before she moved on to something else. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe she was just restless, I told myself. Maybe she needed a change of pace after years of working from home. But the more she slipped out, the more withdrawn she became when she was home, like she was carrying a weight she didn't want to share. I tried not to overthink it. Claire and I had always given each other room to breathe. That was our way. If something was bothering her, I trusted she'd tell me when she was ready. So I didn't push. Instead, I watched. I noticed the small things. How she'd linger in the doorway before leaving, as if hesitating. How she'd set her phone face down on the table during dinner. How her laughter, once so easy, felt rare and forced. When I tried to bridge the gap, asking if she wanted to take a walk like we used to, or suggesting we try a new restaurant, she'd offer a small smile, a gentle, "I'm okay, just tired," and retreat back into herself. I took her at her word, but the pattern didn't break. Days turned into weeks, and the distance grew. It was like I was living with a shadow of the woman I'd married, close enough to see her, but too far to reach. I didn't want to be the kind of husband who nagged or hovered, so I held back, hoping she'd come around. But the truth is, it was wearing me down. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling of our bedroom, wondering what had changed. Was it me? Was it the monotony of our life together? Had I missed something crucial, some sign that I let her down? I replayed our conversations, our routines, searching for a clue, but nothing stood out. The worst part was the uncertainty. She wasn't angry or cruel, just absent in a way that felt worse than any argument. I started feeling like I was orbiting her, tethered by love, but drifting in a space I didn't understand. And yet, I still believed that if I gave her enough time, enough space, she'd open up. That's what we'd always done, trusted each other to share when the time was right. But weeks turned into months, and the silence grew heavier. One evening, after watching her walk through the door, looking like a ghost of herself, eyes distant, shoulders slumped, I couldn't pretend anymore. I waited until we were sitting at the kitchen table, the hum of the fridge filling the quiet, and I asked, "Claire, what's going on? You've been out all the time lately, and when you're here, you barely talk to me. Is something wrong?" She kept her eyes on her mug, tracing the rim with her finger, and said softly, "No, everything's fine." But her voice was flat, unconvincing. I knew her too well to let it slide. "Claire, come on," I said, leaning forward. "I know you. I can tell when something's off. This isn't just in my head." She looked up then, her eyes meeting mine for the first time in weeks, and I saw something flicker, guilt, maybe, or fear. "Andrew," she said, her voice low, "I just need to be alone for a while. I need space to figure out how I'm feeling. I don't know how to explain it yet." The words hit like a punch I didn't see coming. For a moment, I just sat there, trying to process what she meant. "Are you saying you want a break?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. She shook her head quickly. "No, it's not like that. I don't want to leave you or anything. I need room to think, to sort out what's in my head. I can't do that if I'm always explaining myself." I searched her face for some hint of what was driving this, but she looked away, her jaw tight. I wanted to push to demand answers, but I didn't. That wasn't us. Instead, I nodded, swallowing the ache in my chest. "Okay," I said, "if that's what you need." But inside, something shifted. Her words had flipped a switch in me. If she didn't want me close, I wasn't going to force it. I'd spent months trying to read her, to reach her, and it had left me exhausted, like I was chasing someone who didn't want to be caught. So, I made a decision. I'd give her the space she asked for, fully and completely. I stopped asking if she was okay. I stopped waiting up when she was out late. I stopped wondering where she was going or who she was texting. I pulled back, not out of spite, but because I didn't know what else to do. If she wanted distance, I'd give it to her, even if it meant letting go of the woman I'd once thought was my whole world. Days turned into weeks, and our home became a place of polite transactions. "Did you pay the electric bill?" she'd ask. "Your mail's on the counter," I'd reply. That was it, just the bare minimum, like roommates who happened to share a bed. At first, Claire seemed fine with it, like she'd gotten what she wanted. But as time went on, I noticed small changes. She'd linger in the kitchen when I was making coffee, hovering like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Sometimes she'd start to speak, her mouth opening, then close again like she'd thought better of it. I didn't know if I was supposed to step in or let her figure it out, so I stayed quiet. I'd already tried reaching out, and it hadn't worked. I wasn't going to beg for her to let me in. Then one night, as we passed each other in the hallway, something we'd done 100 times before, she stopped. "You haven't asked how I'm doing in weeks," she said, her voice soft but sharp, like she was accusing me of something. I paused, looking at her, and kept my tone even. "You said you wanted to be alone, Claire. I'm just respecting that." She didn't argue, but her eyes searched mine, like she was waiting for me to say more. When I didn't, she nodded slowly, almost like she was confused by her own reaction, and walked away. That moment stayed with me, a small crack in the wall she'd built. I didn't know what it meant, but it left me wondering, was she starting to feel the weight of the space she'd asked for? Or was something else breaking through? Something she still wasn't ready to share? The weeks that followed Claire's hallway comment felt like a slow unraveling, a thread pulled loose that neither of us knew how to stop. Our home, once a place of quiet comfort, had become a stage for silent tension. We moved around each other like strangers sharing space, our interactions reduced to the barest necessities. "The trash needs to go out," I'd say. "I'll get it," she'd reply, her voice flat, her eyes avoiding mine. But beneath that surface, something was shifting in Claire. She started lingering more in the kitchen, in the living room, even near the doorway of the spare room where I'd taken a working late. She'd hover, like she was promised of autumn. Looking back, I wonder if we understood then how much would change, not just in the world around us, but within us too. Marriage, I'd learned, has a way of revealing things you can't see when you're just dating. When Claire and I moved in together after the wedding, reality hit like a shift in the weather. We'd both always been private people, content in our own corners of the world. When we were dating, that worked beautifully. We'd meet for a few hours, share a meal or a walk, then retreat to our separate spaces to recharge. But living together in a small house in Asheville's quiet suburbs was different. Suddenly, our differences weren't just quirks, they were part of every single day. I worked as an accountant, my life governed by rigid schedules, early mornings and late nights spent wrestling with financial reports. The office was a constant hum of activity, phones ringing, emails piling up, clients demanding answers. By the time I got home, I was drained, craving silence to reset my mind. Claire, on the other hand, was a freelance graphic designer. Her work was fluid, creative, unbound by the ticking clock of an office. She'd spend hours sketching at the kitchen table, surrounded by pencils and half-finished designs, or staring out the window, lost in thought. Some days, she'd still be in her pajamas at noon, sipping tea while tweaking a logo or brainstorming for a client. The contrast in our rhythms didn't break us, but it took work to navigate. I'd come home wired from deadlines, needing quiet to decompress, while Claire might still be in the middle of a creative flow, barely noticing I'd walked in. Our evenings were a dance of trying to align our mental states. Sometimes I'd try to talk about my day, but she'd be lost in her work, nodding absently. Other times, she'd want to share an idea, but I'd be too exhausted to engage fully. Still, we made it work. We talked things out, learned when to give space and when to lean in. We'd cook dinner together, or sit on the porch with a glass of wine, letting the silence between us feel like a bridge rather than a wall. In those early months of marriage, despite the occasional stumble, I thought we were finding our footing. I believed we were building something solid, something that could withstand whatever came next. But as the months turned into years, I'd come to see just how fragile that foundation really was, and how a single crack could threaten to bring it all down. The moment I overheard Claire's phone conversation, everything I thought I knew about our marriage shattered. Her words, admitting she'd reconnected with her ex, James, and questioned whether she'd marry the right person, echoed in my head like a record stuck on repeat. I stood there in the hallway, my phone still recording, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. The betrayal wasn't just that she'd reached out to him. It was that she'd let him back into her heart enough to doubt us, to weigh our life together against a past that hadn't even worked out. And yet, the part that cut deepest was her realization, only after spending time with him, that I'd been the one who let her be herself. It wasn't enough that she'd come to that conclusion. It felt like I'd been reduced to a fallback option, a safe choice she only appreciated once she'd tested the waters elsewhere. I walked into the living room, my phone still in hand, though I didn't need to play the recording to know what I'd heard. Claire looked up from the couch, her face streaked with tears, her phone still pressed to her ear. The moment she saw me, her eyes widened and she froze, like she knew I'd heard everything. "Sarah, I have to go," she said quickly, hanging up before her friend could respond. The room was silent, the air thick with the weight of what had just been revealed. "Andrew," she started, her voice trembling, "how much did you hear?" I didn't flinch, didn't soften. "Everything," I said, my tone flat but heavy. "I heard you say you reconnected with James, that you questioned if you married the right person, that you only realized I was good for you after seeing him again." Her face crumpled, tears spilling over as she stood up, reaching for me. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice desperate. "It didn't go anywhere. I didn't do anything. I cut it off, Andrew. I swear." But her words felt hollow, like they were trying to patch a hole too big to mend. "You didn't do anything?" I repeated, my voice rising despite my effort to stay calm. "You let him back in, Claire. You let him make you doubt us. You had to go back to him to figure out what you had with me. Do you know what that feels like?" She shook her head, sobbing now, her hands reaching out again. "I was confused," she said. "I was feeling lost, and he reached out, and I thought. I don't know what I thought, but it made me see how much I love you, how much I need you. I messed up, Andrew, but I didn't betray you. I stopped it before it went anywhere." I stepped back, out of her reach, the ache in my chest spreading like wildfire. "You betrayed me the moment you let him in," I said. "The moment you started comparing me to him. I was here, Claire, every day, trying to reach you, and you were out there questioning whether I was enough." She sank back onto the couch, her hands covering her face, her sobs muffled but relentless. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I was trying to figure out what was wrong with me, not with us. I know I messed up, but I want to fix this. Please, Andrew, give me a chance. Her voice was raw, pleading, but it didn't reach me the way it might have months ago. I looked at her, the woman I'd loved for years, the woman I'd built a life with, and all I could feel was the weight of her doubt. I'm heartbroken, Claire, I said, my voice steady but cold. I can't trust you anymore. Not after this. She looked up, her eyes wide with panic, like she just realized the depth of the damage. Please, she said, standing again, reaching for my hand. I'll do anything. We can go to therapy. We can work through this. I love you, Andrew. I know that now. But her words felt like too little, too late. I pulled my hand away, shaking my head. You don't get to decide you love me now because your ex reminded you why he didn't work out, I said. I'm not your backup plan. I'm not here to wait while you figure out what you want. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her sobbing behind me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The truth had settled over me like a heavy fog. The woman I'd loved, the woman I'd trusted, had let someone else into the space that was supposed to be ours. And no amount of apologies could erase that. The days that followed were a blur of cold silence and raw pain. Claire tried to talk to me again and again, her voice soft and desperate. Sometimes she'd just say my name, Andrew, followed by a pause, like she was hoping I'd fill the silence with forgiveness. Other times, she'd launch into long apologies, repeating the same things. She hadn't meant to hurt me. She'd cut off contact with James. She'd do anything to make it right. But every time she spoke, I heard that phone call again, her voice admitting she'd doubted our marriage, and it stopped me from responding with anything but distance. I started sleeping in the spare room, the door closed, my world shrinking to the bare essentials. Work, sleep, repeat. Claire's presence in the house felt like a ghost haunting a place I used to call home. I threw myself into work, staying late at the office to avoid the tension at home. When I was there, I kept to myself, avoiding the spaces where Claire lingered. But she didn't stop trying. She'd leave notes on the kitchen counter. Can we talk tonight? Or, I'm so sorry, Andrew. I love you. But I couldn't bring myself to respond. I wasn't trying to punish her. I was just done. Done trying to pull honesty from someone who'd hidden so much. Done pretending I could go back to the way things were. Every night, I'd lie awake in the spare room, replaying her words, wondering how we'd gotten here. How had the woman who once felt like my safe harbor become the source of my deepest pain? And more importantly, what was I supposed to do now? By the end of that week, I knew I couldn't keep living in this limbo. Claire's apologies, her tears, her attempts to bridge the gap. They were all too heavy, too tangled with a betrayal I couldn't unhear. I started thinking about what it would mean to walk away, to let go of the life we'd built. The idea terrified me, but it also felt like the only way to reclaim some piece of myself. I wasn't sure what the next step would be, but I knew it couldn't involve staying in a marriage where trust had been broken so deeply. Claire's doubt had changed everything, and I wasn't sure if I could, or even wanted to, find a way back. The question now was whether I'd confront her one last time, or if I'd simply make my choice and move forward, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions alone. The week after I overheard Claire's confession was the hardest of my life. The truth of her betrayal, reconnecting with James, and questioning our marriage, hung over me like a storm cloud, darkening every corner of our home. Claire's attempts to reach me didn't stop. She tried to catch me in the mornings before I left for work, her voice soft and pleading, saying things like, Andrew, please, can we just talk? Or, I know I hurt you, but I'm trying to make this right. Sometimes she'd stand in the doorway of the spare room, her eyes red from crying, and just say my name, hoping I'd respond with something other than silence. But I couldn't. Every time I looked at her, I heard her words from that phone call, admitting she'd doubted whether I was the right choice, and it felt like a fresh wound. I wasn't shutting her out to punish her. I was protecting what little was left of my heart. I'd given her everything, my trust, my patience, my quiet devotion, and she'd let someone else into the space that was supposed to be ours. No apology could erase that. I spent those days grappling with what came next. Part of me wanted to believe we could fix this, that the years we'd spent building a life together meant something stronger than her moment of doubt. But the other part, the louder part, knew I couldn't unhear what she'd said or unfeel the betrayal that had settled into my bones. I started thinking about what it would mean to walk away, to let go of the home we'd made in Asheville, the routines we'd carved out, the quiet moments that had once felt like enough. The idea of leaving terrified me, not because I doubted I could survive without her, but because it meant admitting that the life I'd believed in was gone. Still, I couldn't keep living in this half-marriage, where every interaction was tainted by what I knew. On a Monday morning, I made my decision. I'd spent the weekend sorting through my thoughts, weighing the pain of staying against the pain of leaving. When I walked into the kitchen, Claire was there, pouring tea into her favorite mug, the one with the chipped handle she refused to throw out. She looked up, her eyes bright with a flicker of hope, like she thought today might be the day I'd finally soften. Instead, I set a manila envelope on the counter between us. She froze, her hand hovering over the mug, her gaze dropping to the envelope. "What's this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't answer right away, letting the weight of the moment settle. "Open it," I said finally, my voice steady but heavy. She hesitated, then picked it up, her fingers trembling as she pulled out the divorce papers. The room went still. Claire's face crumpled, tears spilling over before she'd even read the first page. "Andrew, no," she said, her voice breaking. "Please don't do this. We can work through it. We can go to therapy, anything you want. I know I messed up, but I love you." I shook my head, the ache in my chest, so sharp it felt like it might split me open. "Claire, I can't," I said. "I can't pretend I didn't hear what you said. I can't unlearn that you had to go back to him to realize what you had with me. Therapy can't fix that. It can't make me trust you again." She clutched the papers to her chest, sobbing now, her whole body shaking. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said. "I didn't want to lose you. I was confused, I was stupid, but I know now that you're the one I want." Her words hit hard, but they didn't change anything. "You don't get to decide that now," I said, my voice low but firm. "You don't get to choose me because he didn't work out. I'm not your fallback, Claire. I deserve better than being someone you had to doubt first." She reached for me, her hand trembling, but I stepped back, out of reach. "I'm done," I said. "I've been done for a while. I just didn't know it until now." I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her standing there, the divorce papers still in her hands. The sound of her sobs followed me down the hall, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. If I looked back, I might have wavered, and I couldn't afford to do that. Not for her, not for myself. In the weeks that followed, we started the process of untangling our lives. Claire moved out, staying with her friend Sarah while we sorted out the details. She didn't stop trying to reach me, though. She'd call, leaving voicemails that I couldn't bring myself to listen to, or send texts that I left unanswered. "I miss you, Andrew. Can we just talk one more time? I'm so sorry." Each one felt like a needle, sharp but useless against the wall I'd built. I told her, the one time we spoke, that I couldn't keep going back to the same wound. If it took comparing me to someone else to see my worth, I said, then I don't want to be in that picture anymore. I don't want to be your plan B. She cried, but I ended the call before she could say more. I had to, for my own sanity. The house felt empty without her, but it also felt like mine again, like I could breathe without the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me. I started small, reclaiming the spaces we'd shared, rearranging the furniture, boxing up the things she'd left behind, taking down the photos of us smiling on our wedding day. Each step was painful, but it was also freeing, like shedding a skin that no longer fit. I don't know if I'll ever fully heal from what happened, but I know I made the right choice. Some wounds don't need stitches. They need distance, time, and the courage to let go. I've been thinking a lot about what love means, about what it takes to build something real and keep it alive. Claire and I had something real once, but her doubt broke it, and I couldn't stay in a marriage where I felt like an afterthought. If you were in my place, what would you have done? Would you have fought for her, tried to rebuild the trust? Or would you have walked away, like I did, choosing yourself over a love that no longer felt safe? The choice wasn't easy, but it was mine, and it's brought me a kind of peace I didn't think I'd find again. But I can't help wondering what lies ahead and whether the scars of this will ever fully fade.